G'day everybody. Welcome to session 2 of Coaches Online. How to plan a season. As you'll probably be able to tell, I'm the only one in this chat because when we did this on Wednesday night, I managed to forget to click record. So now I'm just going to record a dry run. There won't be any chance for people to ask questions, obviously, but I'll try and cover the questions that were asked on Wednesday night. And hopefully if anyone else has any questions, just feel free to email me, joel.anderson@ballaratbasketball.com. Right, let's get into it. So what we're going to cover this morning is goal setting, segmenting your season, key competencies and matrix, and a bit of a different matrix to the one we looked at in week 1, and just different ways to be in constant review and how it's more than fine if you chop and change things throughout the season based on your current progress. So goal setting, what do you want to achieve with a season? It's okay to have a lot of goals. It's okay to have lofty goals. It's okay to not have lofty goals. Really, it's heavily dependent on you, the level of players that you have. If you are a domestic coach of an under-10 team, obviously your main goals are going to be to learn skills and retain players and make sure the kids have fun, and that's great. I think that any level of basketball that you coach, one of those main goals should be that kids have fun. It's just that fun might be different for an under 12 kid who's just starting to play versus an under 18 state team. Fun might be winning for them. So again, goals definitely can be different throughout the levels you play at, but it's important that you have them, so that way it gives you a chance to measure yourself against those goals, both at the end of the season and throughout. Learning skills and skill acquisition, and any way you want to term it, really important, but try and find a way to actually quantify whether they have done a good enough job of that. So we'll go to this little document that I've got here. So this I'll send out for everybody that has given me their email address afterwards. And it's a bit of a thing I knocked up on Wednesday afternoon, just as to how I would plan if I coached an under 14 rush season. It's reasonably basic. It only took a couple of hours to put together. So it's a good starting point, I think, for when I send this to you. If this is something that you think you want to bring on for your season, then it's a good starting point. And if you coach an under 10 domestic team, and maybe you strip half of it away. If you coach an under 16 team, it maybe you add things to it, or an under 18 team. So it's just a good starting point, I think, and it'll be a good reference. And you may want to build a whole one of yourself, or maybe you only like one of the tabs that I do down the bottom and the rest of them you think are junk. That's more than okay too. So goals. So this is where I would be at if I coached an under 14 rush team. So for starters, a divisional goal. We're the rush 14 ones. So I want to make the Victorian Championship division in grading phase 1. That means I don't have to play in grading phase 2, which gives me more time to work on skill development. And I also want to make the Junior Classic, which is the June long weekend tournament, which should be coming up if we were playing. Lofty goals, but that's what I want to do with this team. Style. So I want them to understand concepts. So some key concepts that the Ballarat club use. Transitional play, on ball screens, and moving off the ball. There's not any serious concepts in there like loop and circle screens and stuff like that we do. I have some more basic goals set about their understanding concepts, and you can see the measurement, so I'm able to sort of quantify that. Do they actually consistently hit the sidelines in transition? Do they actually make the defender hit the ball 70% of the time? And when moving off the ball, they don't just stand and watch. They actually understand what they should be doing and where they should be and how they should be doing that. So they're just some sort of ways that I'm going to use to measure it. It's a way that you just don't trick yourself throughout the season, because often if I put down, I want them to understand how to play in transition, and in week 12, I'm watching that, I might be like, yeah, well, we score a lot, so I'm happy with that. But I want to find a way to measure that, to keep myself honest as we're going through, and to enable an easier review throughout the season. So my idea of transition play is that they consistently hit the sidelines. And once they do that, and they actually spread the floor wide, then we can move on to the next part. So you see how we're giving a measurement there to actually quantify the goal. Skill ones, it could just be that I want them to be able to lay up and dribble with both hands. And what does that mean? It means can comfortably do it 1v0 for under 14s. I'm not asking them to finish left hand on a reversal as someone, whacks them. And then concepts, defensive concepts, boxing out or blocking out, chest blows, and they understand how to rotate. So that might be all of it. You might have containing their opponent too. That would have been a good one. I didn't think of that when I was doing this. So yeah, figuring out a way, what you want to achieve out of the season, and you may add to this as you go along. I would suggest not deleting stuff, because that way you can trick yourself when you get to it. Like, let's say I come up and I say, all right, well, chest blows. I coach under 14 girls. They really don't like chest blows because they're a bit scared of that contact. I'm going to delete that goal. Don't delete it. You can add stuff to it, and maybe you just write next to it, look, it wasn't something we were able to achieve, and why. Because that way, when you are coaching the under 14 rush team next year, you're not going to trick yourself into adding things, or maybe you think about different ways to teach it, and it becomes a bit of a log of your thoughts as a coach. So yeah, don't delete stuff from your season plan as you go through. Maybe just move it to the bottom, or write in red next to it as why you didn't achieve it or why you removed it, and continue on from there. Back to the PowerPoint. It's pretty, I'm pretty proud of the PowerPoint. So now we talk about breaking up your season. So we're going to talk about the calendar segmentation now, and then we'll talk about how we work those goals into the segments. So just so you understand where we're going. So segmenting your season, this can be different for everybody. As a VJBL team, I would segment it roughly based on grading phases and or phases of your division. So it may be that your grading phase 1 and grading phase 2 is one or two different phases, and then the first half of your VC season and the second half of your VC season might be different phases as well. If you're not in VC, maybe the whole season, the whole regular season is one phase, the whole grading phase is another phase, and then finals are a different phase after that. So just figuring out how you want to do that, and it really is based around what goals you want to achieve in that time, or what topics you want to use for a certain period of time. If you're a domestic coach, it may be that you do it on school terms. So the first term of play is phase 1. The second term of play is phase 2. Maybe you're a bit past that and you think, all right, well, I can knock 4 different phases off. So maybe use the months of the season. It's really whatever you're comfortable with. And I think that when you start off as a coach, there'll probably be less segments. And as you get more experienced and you understand how to move on from things a bit quicker, then you'll have more segments. And also it's heavily dependent on how much time you get to spend with the kids. If you get 2 hour-and-a-half sessions a week with a full court, just your team, the kids are always there, obviously it's easier to cover more content, so that way you can segment a bit more. If you're a domestic coach and maybe you get one hour training a week, then maybe you move on by school terms, because you just can't cover enough content to warrant having a monthly segment that you're trying to move on from. But that's something you will get better at the more you do it. So now we will talk about assigning goals to segments. So what makes the most sense? You've set your goals out at the start of the season. Where are you going to address each one? So for example, obviously if I'm going to make VC and grading phase 1, then that goal has to be assigned to whatever segment I have based around grading phase 1. Understanding concepts, yep, they're probably pretty key because they're to do with style of play. They're probably pretty key to us winning early on, so maybe they have to be assigned to earlier ones. The skill ones, if these aren't going to cost us games, then maybe they're things that we can really look to touch on in a second or a third segment. Obviously, we have to touch on them and we have to make sure that they're there by the end of the season, but maybe that's not integral in our goals for grading phase 1 or segment 1. So you see how we start assigning them based on what makes sense. How does it help your athletes to develop? Just making sure that you are touching on everything and that you are setting these goals up. So maybe you're setting your layup goal for segment 1 because you think, okay, that is going to be really integral to us attaining other goals, but being able to dribble left-handed might not be so critical to us achieving VC in that first grading phase, or to us achieving our first division VC, our first division domestic game. So we're just trying to figure out where they fit. in a most logical way. Remembering about the VJBL season, that the season is backwards. The most important games you play are straight off the bat. It's all about winning those first couple of games to make that division that you are most competitive in. I would absolutely rather to make the best division and come last than to make the second division and come first, which is what my team did last year. So we made BC, and then we lost a couple of games in the first round and ended up in BC Reserve, and then we won BC Reserve. But we also won 11 games in a row in BC Reserve, and a lot of them were blowouts. So I don't think that the athletes got a good enough chance to really test themselves in a lot of that season, which when you're driving from Ballarat, all the way down to Frankston's or Waverleys and stuff like that, like you want them to be competing every day, every Friday night. And winning that second division means you're the 11th best team in the state. It doesn't mean, much more than that. So making those divisions are really critical early on. So that's obviously part of that goal. All right, now we'll give it to you in a bit of an example. So I've shown you how, here I'll show you how I've segmented my team, my season. So this is how I would go for a VJBL calendar. So I would have a team building phase, personally, again, not the same as everybody else. I would then have a skill development phase and a priming phase. So this team building phase would last all the way through grading phase 1 and then into grading phase 2. Now, this skill development one would take over once we start the regular season. This would be a 50-50 skill development team play sort of level to start with until we saw how we were going to make the classic. And as soon as we figured we couldn't make the classic, or as soon as the classic was over, we would then move to 80% skill development for those next 12 weeks, 20% game stuff. And that's where we really hit all of those things hard. Then if we come to the end of the season and we're looking like we're going to make finals, well, obviously we still want to be competitive in finals because that's still great experience and a great chance for kids to work under pressure, which is something they don't get to do often. So we're building into a priming stage to make sure that we're ready to actually play and ready to work. Now, we've put those goals in. So I've segmented the way this works, and then I would put goals in here. So I did this actually on Wednesday night. I already filled these in. So the goals of the first three phases of my season would be to make BC. Then we move into the skill development. Maybe I'm working on dribbling and defense for those next couple of weeks. And that might move on to here. And then at the end part, we might go back to more win-related goals. So once you actually put that sort of stuff in, okay, now we know this is a team building phase. We know our goal is to make BC. So what are we going to focus on in training in this 3-week period? Well, our main focus is probably building a culture because we may have never played together as a team. They've got to know what I'm about. I've got to figure out what they're about. And we've got to sort of set the standard of a team. We've also got to work on our style of play. Again, you may have half bottom age, half top age kids like I have every year, and they've played together 2 years ago, but a bunch of stuff might have changed about them since then. So you've got to figure out how you're going to play together as a team. And then all the other concepts might just be a bit more introductory, and you're working on them for a shorter period of time. Now, as we move through, we've still got these two as main focuses, but we might start to think about some different things as well and introducing some things in a little bit more detail, and same thing through the 3rd week. So once you've got this covers from October 14th to December 14th. It's 3 little columns that cover 2 months of basketball. You will find that this makes your planning for each training session much easier. Because instead of coming in and being like, okay, what did we do last week? What are we going to do this week? What's important? You're looking straight at this sheet, and that is telling you based on your own planning what is important. Now, you may review this, and we'll talk a bit more about review later, and change as you go on, but filling this in prior to gives you an idea of, all right, ideally, everything going to plan, what are we going to do each week? And you'll find that your training actually flows a lot better. Kids will buy into what you're doing because they understand what phase you're in, and they understand all of this because you're explaining to them as they go along. So it just makes you a more prepared coach, and a more prepared coach is a better coach. if I was coaching a domestic team, it might be stripped down a little bit more. So instead of having different stuff here, mental skills, well-being, strength and conditioning, you don't have as much time to spend with them. So teaching them well-being, strength and conditioning might be something you have to leave up to somebody else. You may have to do much more just basketball related stuff. So, we stripped it down: passing, handling, shooting, defense. All right, well, our season also only goes for 5 months. So how are we going to work these things in? All right, well, the grading phases and the first bit of the season, that might be team building as you're figuring out how to play together to make sure you make the best division you can. So those kids are challenged week in, week out. And then the next 12, 14 weeks, all about skill development. So you're only limited focus on your style of play, limited focus on your culture maybe, and you're really working in a different block of skill each week. So like this 6-week period, you've got shooting and ball handling. The next one, you've still got shooting because the ball's got to go in the hole, right? And then you're working on some more defense stuff, and then defense and shooting again. And so you're working those things throughout to make sure that you are covering everything. And then again, even if you're doing a single plan once a week that only goes for an hour, this will really help you plan that because you know where you're meant to be at each point. You don't want to get to the end of the season and you realize you've spent 60% of every training session on ball handling and never touched on shooting because you just forgot or because you didn't realize you were doing that. So that's really important as you move along. So hopefully everybody understands calendar segmentation and how you assign goals to help you build on that planning phase. We'll go back to the PowerPoint. So that was goal and segment examples. Key competencies. Now, lost that. In the matrix that I showed you on in session 1, it was a real drill matrix. So that was a matrix that I used for one of my state teams where I know all the different sort of drills and sets we're going to run. So they're more based around those, and I know what the goal is going to be with each drill and what the points of emphasis are going to be with each set already. So that's probably not as relevant to everybody else. So what I've done this time is I've made one that's based more around concepts and skills. So we'll go through that in a minute. But what I mean by that is it's the same stuff. It's just you're thinking about a different layer of it to the end result. So you might have defense, one-on-one containment as a skill, and you might have 3 different drills to touch on that. But you're just going to tick off each time you've touched on the skill instead of every single different drill, because that's it's a lot easier to follow that way anyway. Now, the list of key competencies, associations may provide that for you, or your domestic club may provide that for you. But if they don't, just develop your own. It's a really important thing to do at the start of the season, so you don't realize that you've coached under 14 girls for 12 months, and at the end of it, none of them know how to do a retreat dribble because you didn't think of it. And a retreat dribble is a really important dribble because everybody's so used to dribbling forward all the time, and no one knows how to dribble backwards, which is often important, especially when you're getting trapped like you do all the time in under 14s. So develop your own, and it might be that it's a very basic version in your first season, and as you go along, you're adding stuff, and you're like, oh yeah, well I want to try that, but that's not my key competencies, and I'll add it. And as you go along year after year, you've got this big document that you are able to use, and you've refined, and then you're looking back at the one you used in the first year, and you're like, oh geez, that was basic, but now I'm such a better coach. I've made this myself. So this is what I did on Wednesday. So again, it's not exhaustive, but it's just things I thought would be handy for an under 14 rush team to know. So I've broken it down into 4 categories. So I've got offensive concepts, sideline out of bounds, your motion concepts, your spacing concepts, and your second side actions. Your offensive skills, and these are all the skills that I thought would be important to an under 14 rush player over an 11-month season. How competent or excellent you want them to be at the end of the season on each one may be part of your goal setting. It may not be, but that's fine. And then some defensive concepts as well, and some defensive skills and how I would break that down. So what I would do with this matrix, as I touched on last week, is every time we touch on a topic each week, I would block it out with green. So that way I know that, all right, well, week 1, 2, and 3, we've done a Spurs drill, and that's a split kick and extra spacing concept. So now I might be able to, as I'm going forward, these are really important to the first 2 blocks of my segments, the first 2 segments, because we're trying to make a good division, and how we play together in the offensive concept side of things might be really, really important, more so than all of these skills. So it may be that there's a lot of green in this sort of area in the first 3-4 weeks, and there's less green, but still some green down here. Same thing here. You'd have a lot of green in these concepts, less green in these skills potentially. And then as you move on week by week, you would be able to track what you've actually touched on each time. So it's a really good way to make sure you're touching base on everything, which helps with your review. So let's say you get down on a Friday night and you've got Sarah and she's turned the ball over a lot, and everything you're telling her, it just doesn't seem to help. And you're thinking, well, why? Why is she turning that ball over? And you go back and you look at all this ball handling stuff, and you see that you've not a lot of green. And you're thinking, all right, well, we've obviously got to do a lot more ball handling stuff, because Sarah and her mate Jane, and they're just chucking that ball away all the time. Maybe it's because of passing, maybe they're getting their pocket picked, but this allows you to review as to why that may be. And the better way is if you come back and you realize we're working on this every week and they're not getting it, change the way you're teaching it. That's something I find with boxing out, is that every year you have a different team and different kids think about boxing out a different way, or they value it differently, or some kids are really physical, some kids aren't, some kids are really competitive, some kids aren't. So you just got to find a different way to practice it and a different way to term it so that they really understand and buy in. So keeping track of what you're teaching and when you're teaching it is just desperately important to both your kids and you being a better coach. I think that covers that reasonably well. Yep, this is what I just explained. Still getting used to using PowerPoints. So yeah, so using the drill as the checkpoint is the way I showed the matrix in session 1, versus using the point of emphasis or the skill as the actual checkpoint, which is this matrix instead. So whatever makes more sense to you. You'll have both, because I sent the first one out last week and I'll send the second one out this morning once I'm finished recording this. So yeah, you should be able to have a think about that. Maybe you want to do a little bit of both. Maybe like personally, I think the way I showed you today is probably the better way for everybody to do it. It just doesn't doesn't resonate as much with me. All right, lastly, we'll talk into review. So I think the most important part about the review is that you constantly do it. So this isn't something that you would do at the end of a season. It's not something that someone else has to do for you. It's consistent. So maybe it is with an assistant coach every Friday night, you chat about things that didn't work, and you know you've got training on Sunday, so maybe you touch base on Saturday again once you've let the emotion cool off a little bit, and you come back in and you say, all right, well, let's look at our plan. Maybe you use a Google sheet so you can both be on it at the same time, and you're a bit techie like that, and so you're looking at the sheet and you're saying, all right, well, how are our goals doing? Like, what do we need to change? What are we going to, if we change stuff this week, what does that mean for the further segments down the track? And it just builds a good sort of chat with actual facts. So that way you're really talking about things you can control instead of sort of more opinion-based things like, oh, well, Sarah from before, I hope there isn't a Sarah in the rush team. I don't really know, unfortunately. But Sarah, she's doing all this stuff. And instead of getting caught up in why she's chucking the ball away all the time, you're like, all right, Sarah's doing this. Her mate Jane is also doing it. When we actually knuckle down and think about it, there's also 3 other girls that are chucking the ball away. Maybe passing is going to be really more important to us in the short term than we thought. So even though we were going to come back to this in week 8 and 9, and it's only week 4 now, our goal of making VC is going to be heavily impacted by the fact that we're throwing the ball away all the time. So let's move that up. And it still does fit in with our goal of making VC. It's just that we've had to change a focus to actually do it. So you don't want to get to that review at the end of the season when you can't do anything about it, and do that. So it's a real weekly chat, and this can be with an assistant coach. It can be with a coach of another team that might see bits and pieces of your game because they're playing after you or before you, and they see it. It could be from your partner who watches you coach. Mine's heavily critical of me all the time. So it really is just chatting about it, and not necessarily directly after the game, because I know what I'm like after a game sometimes, but the next day and before your next training session, just really thinking about what your goals are, how you're going to achieve those goals, and what you're getting through in terms of content week in, week out. So thank you. That's only gone for 25 minutes. So I think I might have just gone through it quicker. Um, please email me any questions you have. It's joel.anderson@ballaratbasketball.com. I will get back to you. I hope you're getting something out of these sessions. Next week, Ryan McHugh, who's one of our youth league men's coaches, is going to present on maximizing a training session. So definitely come along for that. It's going to show some good ways that you can use smaller numbers. It's going to show you some ways that you can get kids to have more hands on a basketball, so it's not just 5-on-5, one ball between 10 kids all the time. It's going to be good. So tune in. I'll see you all there, and yeah, please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.